This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 11th of November 2021, and I am 2J.
I'm 2.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, IEBC shocker for Uhuru RUTO Raila. In the Standard, a country living on Fuliza gambling.
Wow.
In the Star, RUTO cops in blame game over violence. And then the People Daily, RUTO blames Raila for Kondele chaos.
Now, if you think yesterday's violence in Kondele was spontaneous, then think again. We want to tell you the scheme behind yesterday's violence is well thought out and layered. We want to hypothesize that the Kondele violence is aimed at dragging Raila to the ICC. And the rollout began yesterday.
Wow.
Question is, who is behind the scheme? Consider our thoughts. If William Ruto knows his case at the ICC is about to get animated, he will not play legal. He will play political. And the political option is Samsonian. He will drag down everybody with him, more so Raila. How would he drag Raila? The idea is to paint him as a common denominator of election violence in Kenya. The only way to do this is to manufacture violence in his strongholds. Nowhere else, just Raila's strongholds. The idea is to portray Babaman as a warmonger. If he succeeds in doing this, then come March 2022, when Gisharu's case is up for trial, Ruto will say, but oh look, why is the ICC not worried about the violence in Nyanza? Or people are dying at the hands of Baba and the world is letting it happen. He will basically play victim and file a case against Raila at the ICC. And yes, he's begun recording the violence. Yesterday, after Kondele, Ruto unusually published pictures of damaged cars, some with what looked like blood spatters on social media. Our deputy president, he was basically filing a report. And the only time you are filing reports is when you intend to use them in future. Raila would do well to watch over his back. If Ruto survived ICC in 2016, it is because he was deputy president, not chair of Sugoi Chicken Owners Association. If he will survive ICC again this time round, maybe his incumbency won't be of much help. But a prisoner's dilemma scenario might just be his out-of-jail card. To Baba, therefore, watch Ruto. Man is full of traps.
Oh, traps indeed. And along the same vein, yesterday we saw Mawe democracy in action, the politics of stone throwing. Ruto blamed Raila, the police blamed Ruto for the chaos, and we are told that the chaos began because Ruto handed out 1 million shillings to some and not to others. Ruto's team was quick to dismiss this this police narrative as ukora tupu. But let us explore the real ukora. We can consider two scenarios, as 2M has also said. One, that the chaos in Kondele yesterday was spontaneous. Oh, sorry, that he didn't say. Thus alluding to Ruto's usual crowd payment scheme simply backfiring. Or two, chaos was manufactured, and if so, why and by who? Now, I'll explore as well scenario 2. Is it too simplistic to say that Raila was the chief architect of yesterday's chaos? Or do we agree with 2M that the chief architect of chaos was William Ruto? Now, Ruto's plan fell neatly into place to pin it on Raila. Ruto understands manufacturing conflict is also perpetuating his victim or sympathy card, where his support comes from. And this support comes from this outsider status, that look, we shame me. And manufacturing chaos using stones in an area synonymous with stone throwers is a stroke of genius. Hapo amejaribu. But yesterday, Ruto behaved like a frustrated man. We saw cracks. Earlier this week, 2J diagnosed Ruto as suffering from political hubris. This hubris exposes one as fragile. It took only one small spontaneous event like yesterday to destabilize his course. Now, Ruto reminded me of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1812 as he fatally made his way into Russia. At the height of Napoleon's success, his army was unable to deal with mud, snow, and hunger at the gates of Moscow.
Right.
He failed majorly. Now, so far, RUTO's momentum has been at an all-time high, but RUTO will be easily slowed down because he has constructed narratives that are based on old political tricks. There are many battles Napoleon could have won if he had been more patient and used newer tactics. He might also have attained more power if he had grown more organically rather than rushing impulsively into Spain and Russia.
Correct.
Now, as Bwana Asifue goes shopping for new campaign prados, he is failing to see that the public can see all his tricks, and they may use them against him, including the major one of ICC.
Oh yes, that's very, very true. And this possibility may actually be closer than we think. If you remember, William Ruto's lawyer, Paul Gichero, is currently on trial at the ICC for witness tampering related to the RUTO Sang case of 2013. In fact, just last month, the ICC prosecution requested to have the case file from RUTO's case transferred to Gichero's case.
Whoa.
And on Tuesday, the ICC judge approved that request. Now, this means that all of the evidence and information that was gathered during the RUTO Sang case can now be used to convict Paul Gichero. And this could also signal the beginning of the end for one Mr. William Ruto. Follow my thinking. So Fatou Bensouda told us that the ICC could not proceed with Ruto's case because, and I quote, there had been witness interference and political meddling which RUTO had benefited from, even though there was no evidence of his personal involvement in it. So the charges against him were vacated, suspended in time just until a later date. Then, last year, RUTO's lawyer Paul Gichero surrendered to the ICC. And this was after evidence showed that Gichero bribed, intimidated, or threatened witnesses in the case against the DP. Now, putting this all together, the critical question I ask is, what exactly does Paul Gichero know? Is it possible that this case could reopen the trial of William Ruto? Because there actually is precedent for this. And this is the same path that DRC's Jean-Pierre Bemba took. In 2008, Bemba went to The Hague for crimes against humanity, of which he managed to escape. But at the same time, Bemba's lawyer was arrested by the ICC on charges of witness tampering and bribery. And the ICC said that Bemba was responsible as well. Does this sound familiar? This Gichero fellow surrendered to the ICC willingly. So is it possible that he could enter, maybe, into a plea bargain with the International Court and become a key witness in the RUTO case? After all, if they can prove that Gichero was the chief engineer of witness tampering, then he can tell the court how he did it and who he did it for. And if this is successful, the next step is to issue a warrant of arrest for Mr. DP. And again, Bemba gives us the blueprint. One day, our old friend Louis Moreno Ocampo showed up out of nowhere and arrested him. And Bemba had no idea it was coming. And that's because the ICC had issued a sealed warrant of arrest, which meant that it was withheld from the public and only accessible to the courts. So our advice to William Ruto then is to stop tanga-tangaing around Uganda and Sudan. If things are going the way we have suggested, your next trip outside of the country might find you in handcuffs, visiting The Hague again.
Oof. Strong words there. So, so we have a three-part criteria that we use to break down the headlines. We ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, thoughtful or just plain lazy? The one that caught my eye has to be a country living on Fuliza and gambling. What do you guys think?
Absolutely. I like that one. You know, Kenyans like to say, oh, the government is overborrowing. Government is overborrowing. You're the ones who are borrowing one. If you're borrowing 1.3 billion shillings a day, you're borrowing more than government.
Right? And the whole point is that if government is meant to be a mirror or reflection of the people, who's influencing who?
Man in the mirror.
Some say debt makes the world go round. Shall we give it our winning headline just for being creative?
Yes.
Absolutely.
There you have it. The Standard gives us our winning headline.
And now, final thought. It is inspired by an operation called Operation Fish.
Why did you stutter there? You didn't believe it yourself. So in June 1940, the Second World War was not going very well for Great Britain. The French army soon crumbled, and by mid-month, German troops were marching into Paris. The Nazi invasion into Britain seemed both imminent and inevitable. And I think we all know this. War is costly, and it was costly then. But the gold that the Brits needed for victory was sitting in London, which at that time was becoming a vulnerable city. So the solution they devised was to ship England's treasure overseas by boat to Canada. Now, we're not talking about a little bit of money, but over what today would be considered 300 billion worth of gold and securities.
Wow.
So today, over 75 years later, it still remains the world's largest transfer of wealth from country to country. And it's called Operation Fish, as Tuam told us, and here is why it happened. In 1940, Winston Churchill had just become Prime Minister, as the war was getting worse. As a guarantee that the empire could continue to fight the war if the UK was invaded, Churchill devised this plan to ship British wealth to the safety of Canada, as we know, one of their colonies. But I think we have to ask one important question. Why was England so eager to get their gold out of the country and into Canada? Yes, they needed gold to purchase weapons to fuel the war, as GK will tell us. And an invasion was looking very likely. But at the exact same time, the Nazis were getting incredibly desperate for gold themselves. So during World War II, the German Nazi government robbed more than 600 tons of European gold. It has been called the greatest robbery in world history. And that gold was important for financing Germany's wars. At that time, the stolen gold was worth about what we would say, then was about $600 million. Today, it would be around 22 billion that they robbed clean.
Yeah, that's Uganda's GDP.
So suppliers would not accept the German currency, but they would accept payment in gold. So the Nazis robbed central banks because that's where the gold was. So the Nazis then systematically attempted to steal each nation's gold in each country it invaded. So for England, the solution was obvious. Get the gold out. But the question was how, right? Fantastic.
As you say, this was the largest movement of physical wealth in history. Probably the greatest economic gamble of all time. They literally moved 3 times Kenya's wealth using 8 ships. Can you imagine? Now, the only way, as you said, to transport the tons of gold and securities was by ship. Across the U-boat infested North Atlantic. Now, the U-boat was a German submarine that was responsible for the naval carnage that happened in the First and Second World Wars. In fact, by May of 1940, over 100 ships had been sunk by the Nazi U-boats. This represented 41% of all ship tonnage, and with only one U-boat loss. To make matters worse, history wasn't on Britain's side. They had earlier tried to evacuate their wealth to Canada in World War I with the SS Laurentic, which was carrying 43 tons of gold from Liverpool to Halifax in Canada, when it was sunk in 1917 by a German submarine off the coast of Ireland. The Germans were quite a menace. Anyway, the plan was that the ships would sail across the North Atlantic under a convoy. On June 24, 1940, ships by the name HMS Revenge, HMS Resolution, HMS Enterprise, the HMS Emerald, the cruiser HMS Bonaventure,
sounds promising,
and 3 converted former passenger lines, the Monarch of Bermuda, the SS Sobieski, and SS Battery, left for Halifax, Canada. They crossed the 4,600-kilometer North Atlantic waters, braving storms and Hitler's navy, and none of them was touched. On July 1st, 7 a.m., Britain's gold docked in Canada, safe. Not a single gold bar was missing. Come to think of it, if Hitler knew what the ships were carrying, he would rather have destroyed them than attempt to steal the wealth, because nothing would have been greater than sinking all of the British Empire and her wealth.
This is true. I really loved hearing about Operation Fish and that it had been a secret all these years, right? So the gold, why the gold was moving to Canada was because it would allow the British to continue to buy weapons on a cash and carry basis. So there's something called the Lend-Lease Act of 1941. And this allowed the US government to lend or lease, rather than sell, war supplies to any nation that was deemed vital to the defense of the United States. So under this policy, they were able to supply military aid to its foreign allies during World War II while still remaining officially neutral. But that gold needed to move to Canada to be closer in case the British needed to pay for weapons in cash, right? So what was interesting from all of this is why Canada? They considered it to be safe and convenient. So by early 1936, Canada had already had the beginnings of a very advanced central banking system from about 1935. And the Bank of Canada, the Central Bank of Canada's regulations allowed for earmarked gold accounts. Now what this means is that you can back up your monetary agreements even with gold from other countries and whatnot. So England considered this a safe bet, as well as being as part of their Commonwealth. The other thing was that it was convenient because the Royal Canadian Mint supplied gold at a very attractive price. And so because the Bank of Canada was, relatively speaking, on the doorstep of near New York, where the Bank of England would frequently transact with, it made sense to move it there. And what was interesting at the time, so Churchill, like you said, had just become Prime Minister, and he's delivering these powerful speeches, right? Never surrender, don't back down, this is Britain's finest hour. And then unbeknownst to many of the citizens, they're really moving a lot of the money out of the country. What we are also told is that a lot of European countries, such as Norway, Belgium, Netherlands, had started moving their money to the Central Bank of England, which they thought was this anchor. But then also to keep it safe, their money was also held now as part of those shipments that 2M was talking about. Did you know that the shipments were never actually insured? So there's a war risk insurance office, and they determined that actually there was no need to let them know, because even if the ship sank or something had happened, they could never be compensated anyway. The amounts were too great to do. And then I read an interesting tidbit, which could have been the beginnings of offshore banking as we know it. Literally. The French had also sent a lot of their bullion, their gold, to Canada. They say about $305 million in those days value. And that was in June 1914 on the Emile Bertin. Now, what happened was, because Britain was fighting this war and was saying, listen, we need all the allies to chip in and help, they tried to get the French stash from the Canadians. And the Canadians said, no way, we are impartial. We will hold the money and we will not give it up till this war is over. So they actually froze the French assets from the British till the war was over. And the idea there was that they wanted to remain impartial. Another crucial person or rather link was the Swiss bankers. They were really big mediators at this time. So the UK Securities actually set up shop in this building where the gold was being kept in Canada. So you can imagine the floors above have no idea what's being hidden underneath. And underneath, the British have started the UK Securities, United Kingdom Security Deposit business. And so they would transact and nobody else would know what was going on. And the Swiss bankers, were told, played a very crucial role in these transactions by being financial middlemen.
That's why they will not say. That's why they will not snitch on anybody up to now.
Up to now, the trademark started as far back as then. And we're even told that the Vatican secretly sent nearly 8 tons of gold to New York. I think, and then to Fort Knox eventually.
Where was Africa, man?
Anyway,
you know what? We were probably being used as slaves to mine that very same gold.
So I'll end with this. Speaking of gold, Kakamega County government just this week handed over 14 acres of land to the national government's Ministry of Petroleum and Mining for the establishment of a gold refinery. So we're well on our way. We're not too far back.
They're not very clever.
Why?
They should have given it to Kimberland Mines in South Africa. They'll probably have made more money.
No. For Africa, by Africa. Buy Kenya, build Kenya. So the desire for gold is not for the gold itself. It is for the means of freedom and benefit. And that was said by Ralph Waldo Emerson. So may this gold also make Kenya prosper.
Oi.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us on TV. Find us on Twitter as well. Have a lovely evening.